The afternoon sun hung low over the dusty crossroads, casting long shadows across the weathered boards of Garrison's trading post. Tom Garrison sat behind his counter, nursing a glass of whiskey that had long since gone warm. The store was his kingdom, a modest empire of dry goods, ammunition, and overpriced necessities that travelers couldn't do without. For 15 years, he'd run this place where 3 major trails converged, and in all that time, he'd grown comfortable in his role as the small king of nowhere. The silence of the late afternoon was absolute, broken only by the occasional creak of settling wood and the buzz of flies circling near the window. Tom's eyelids grew heavy, the whiskey working its familiar magic on his senses. Business had been slow for days, and he found himself hoping for the arrival of a wagon train or perhaps a group of prospectors heading west. Anything to break the monotony and fill his coffers. Then he heard it. At first, it was just a whisper on the wind, a rhythmic pounding that could have been his own heartbeat echoing in his ears. But it grew louder, more insistent, until there was no mistaking it for anything other than what it was. Hoofbeats. Not just a few riders, but many. The sound rolled across the prairie like thunder, growing in intensity until the very walls of the trading post seemed to vibrate with it. Tom stood abruptly, knocking over his glass. The amber liquid spread across the counter, but he paid it no mind. Through the dusty window, he could see them coming. A line of riders stretched across the horizon, moving with purpose and precision. As they drew closer, he counted 20, 30, 50, and still they came. His mouth went dry despite the whiskey. These weren't soldiers. He knew the look of cavalry well enough. Nor were they bandits. Who would have approached with more caution and certainly more noise? These riders sat their horses with the easy grace of those born to the saddle, their faces painted with neither war colors nor expressions of aggression. They simply rode, silent as death itself, their presence more menacing than any war cry could have been. The riders began to form a semicircle around the front of the trading post, their horses stamping and blowing, but otherwise disciplined. Tom's hand instinctively moved toward the shotgun he kept beneath the counter, but something in the deliberate calm of their movements stayed his reach. These men, and he could see now that they were Native Americans, though from which tribe he couldn't tell, had not come for random violence. This was something else entirely. At the center of the formation, a figure emerged that commanded immediate attention. He was an older man, perhaps 60 winters by Tom's estimation, with iron-gray hair worn in long braids adorned with eagle feathers. His face bore the deep lines of one who had seen much and forgotten nothing. He wore traditional dress, a shirt of soft buckskin decorated with intricate beadwork, leggings, and moccasins that had traveled many miles. Around his neck hung a necklace of bear claws that clicked softly as he dismounted. This was no ordinary warrior. This was a chief, and the way the other riders arranged themselves around him spoke of deep respect and unquestioned authority. The man's eyes, dark as obsidian and just as sharp, fixed on the door of the trading post with an intensity that made Tom's skin prickle. The chief walked forward with measured steps, neither hurried nor hesitant. His warriors remained mounted, a living wall of patient watchfulness. When he reached the porch, he stopped and stood perfectly still, as if he had all the time in the world. The silence stretched between them like a taut wire. Tom found himself moving toward the door without conscious thought, drawn by a mixture of curiosity and an unnamed dread that coiled in his belly like a snake. His hand trembled slightly as he reached for the latch. The whiskey fog that had clouded his mind moments before burned away, leaving him stone-cold sober and acutely aware of every sound, every movement, every breath. He opened the door. The chief's gaze met his, and Tom felt the weight of judgment in those ancient eyes. For a long moment, neither man spoke. The wind whispered through the grass, and somewhere in the distance, a hawk cried. The mounted warriors sat like statues, their horses occasionally shifting weight but otherwise motionless. "Tom Garrison," the chief said finally, his voice deep and resonant, carrying the authority of mountains and the wisdom of rivers. It was not a question. Tom nodded, his throat too dry for words, How did this man know his name? In all his years at the crossroads, he'd dealt with many tribes, traded with them, sometimes cheated them when he could get away with it, but always maintained a careful distance. He'd never seen this chief before. He was certain of that. A man like this would not be forgotten. The chief's expression remained unreadable, carved from the same stone as the distant mesas. He raised one hand, a gesture so slight it might have been missed, and immediately 2 younger warriors dismounted and flanked him. They were sons or nephews. Perhaps they bore the same strong features, the same bearing of natural leadership. "You have something that belongs to me," the chief said, each word deliberate and weighted with meaning Tom couldn't quite grasp. Tom's mind raced. What could he possibly have? He'd bought nothing from any tribe recently, had no stolen goods that he knew of. His inventory was legitimate, more or less acquired through the usual channels of frontier commerce. "I think there's been some mistake," Tom began, his voice cracking slightly. He cleared his throat and tried again. "I run an honest business here. If there's something you're looking for—" The chief held up his hand, and Tom's words died in his throat. Those dark eyes never wavered, never blinked. They seemed to see through Tom's bluster, through his pretensions, straight into the depths of his soul where all his small cruelties and petty tyrannies lay exposed. "No mistake," the chief said simply. "What was taken must be returned. What was broken must be mended. This is the way." Tom felt sweat trickle down his back despite the cooling afternoon air. The warriors remained silent, but their presence pressed in on him from all sides. He became acutely aware of how alone he was. The nearest town was a day's ride, the nearest fort even farther. Out here, he'd always been the law, the authority, the man others had to reckon with. But now, faced with this quiet show of force, he felt his little kingdom crumbling beneath his feet. "I don't understand," he said, and for perhaps the first time in his adult life, it was the complete truth. The chief studied him for another long moment, then turned his head slightly. Looking past Tom into the shadows of the trading post, his weathered features shifted almost imperceptibly. Was that sorrow? Anger? Tom couldn't tell. "Understanding will come," the chief said. "As the sun sets, so does it rise. As the seasons turn, so do the hearts of men. You will learn, Tom Garrison, or you will perish. This, too, is the way." Without another word, the chief turned and walked back to his horse. He mounted with the fluid grace of a much younger man, then sat waiting while his flanking warriors returned to their own mounts. The entire assembly remained in place, silent and watchful, as if they were waiting for something. Tom stood in his doorway, confusion and fear warring in his chest. What did they want? Why had they come? The chief had spoken in riddles, but the threat, if that's what it was, felt very real. 300 warriors didn't ride to a man's doorstep for philosophical discussions. As the sun continued its descent toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and red, Tom Garrison realized that his quiet afternoon had become something else entirely. Whatever these men were waiting for, whatever had brought them here, he sensed that his life at the crossroads would never be the same. The chief raised his hand once more, and one of the younger warriors produced a horn made from buffalo horn. He raised it to his lips and blew a long, mournful note that carried across the plains like the voice of the land itself. The sound sent chills down Tom's spine, speaking of ancient rights and wrongs, of justice delayed but not forgotten. And still they waited, patient as the stones, certain as the turning of the earth, while Tom Garrison stood in his doorway and wondered what in God's name he had done to bring this judgment down upon his head. The day before had started like any other. Tom had opened the trading post at dawn, sweeping the dust from the floorboards and checking his inventory. The morning brought a few travelers, a family heading west, 2 prospectors needing supplies. By noon, the heat had driven everyone indoors or onward, leaving Tom alone with his merchandise and his thoughts. It was early afternoon when she appeared. At first, Tom hadn't even heard her enter. He'd been in the back room, counting stock, when a subtle shift in the air made him look up. There, in the doorway between the storeroom and the main shop, stood a young woman, perhaps 20 years old, though it was hard to tell. She was Native American, that much was clear, but she wore a simple dress of faded calico that had seen better days, not the traditional garb he might have expected. She was thin, almost fragile-looking, with long black hair woven into a single braid that hung down her back. Her face would have been pretty if not for the wariness in her dark eyes, the look of a deer poised to flee at the slightest threat. She stood perfectly still, as if hoping to remain unnoticed despite having ventured into his domain. "Well now," Tom said, setting down his ledger and moving into the main room. "What have we here?" The girl, for she seemed more girl than woman despite her years, took a small step backward. Her hands clutched a worn leather pouch, and Tom could see they trembled slightly. "I need," she began, then stopped, her voice barely above a whisper. She swallowed and tried again. "I need supplies." Tom moved behind the counter, his practiced eye taking in her appearance. The dress was not only faded but patched in several places. Her moccasins were worn thin. Everything about her spoke of hardship, of someone who had fallen far from wherever she'd started. "Supplies cost money," he said, though he suspected she had precious little of that. She approached the counter with careful steps, her gaze never quite meeting his. From the leather pouch, she produced a few coins, barely enough for a handful of flour and perhaps some salt. She set them on the counter with fingers that still shook. "This is all I have," she said. Tom looked at the meager coins, then back at her. In 15 years of running the trading post, he'd seen all kinds: desperate settlers, broken dreams, people running from something or toward something else. But something about this girl's quiet desperation stirred thoughts in him that had nothing to do with Christian charity. "That won't buy much," he said, leaving the coins where they lay. "But perhaps we could work out an arrangement." She looked up then, and he saw a flash of something in her eyes. Fear, perhaps, or recognition of his meaning. She took another step back. "I can work," she said quickly. "I can clean, organize shelves, whatever you need." Tom came around the counter, moving slowly, like a man approaching a skittish horse. "Work, yes, that's what I had in mind. A pretty thing like you. All alone. Must be hard out there." She moved along the wall, maintaining distance between them. Her breathing had quickened, and her knuckles were white where she gripped the empty pouch. "Just supplies," she said. "I'll work for them. Nothing else." But Tom had already made up his mind. A girl like this, with nowhere to go and no one to protect her, opportunities like this didn't come along every day. He'd been alone too long, and the whiskey only did so much to warm a man's bed at night. "Now, don't be unfriendly," he said, still advancing. "I'm offering you a job, a way to earn what you need. Could be you'll find it's not such a bad arrangement." She had backed herself into a corner now, between a barrel of pickles and a shelf of canned goods. Her eyes darted toward the door, calculating distances, but Tom stood between her and freedom. "Please," she said, and her voice broke slightly. "Please, don't touch me." The words should have given him pause. Would have, perhaps, if he'd been a different man. But Tom Garrison had spent too many years as the only authority at the crossroads. Too many years taking what he wanted from those who couldn't stop him. The plea only confirmed what he'd already suspected. She had no one to turn to, no one who would come looking. He reached out and grasped her wrist. It was thin, bird-like, and she tried to pull away but had nowhere to go. "Now, let's discuss terms," he said, his grip firm but not yet painful. "You need supplies. I need help around here. Storage room needs organizing. Might take a while. Might take all night." She pulled against his hold, her free hand pushing at his chest. "No, please. You don't understand." "I understand plenty," Tom said. "I understand you're hungry, desperate, and alone. I understand I'm the only one for 50 miles who has what you need. That's all the understanding required." He pulled her closer, and she surprised him with her strength as she wrenched sideways, nearly breaking free, but he was larger, stronger, and he pinned her against the wall with his bulk. "Stop fighting," he growled. "You're only making this harder on yourself." "You don't know who I am," she gasped, still struggling. "You don't know." "I don't care who you are," Tom interrupted. "Out here, you're nobody. Just another Indian girl with no money and no options." Something shifted in her expression then. The fear remained, but underneath it, something else emerged, a strange sort of resignation mixed with what might have been pity. She stopped struggling and stood still, looking at him with those dark eyes that suddenly seemed far older than her years. "Then I'll work," she said quietly. "In the storage room, like you said. But you should know." "I know all I need to know," Tom said, already pulling her toward the back room. "You'll work off what you owe, and we'll see about getting you those supplies." The storage room was dim, lit only by a single window high on the wall. Boxes and barrels created a maze of shadows. Tom released her wrist only to close and latch the door behind them. "Start with those shelves there," he said, gesturing vaguely. "Get them organized." She moved to the shelves, her movements mechanical, defeated. She began sorting through the items: candles, soap, various tinned goods, her hands working steadily despite their trembling. Tom watched her for a moment, anticipation building, then moved closer. When he placed his hand on her shoulder, she flinched but didn't pull away. "You're pretty," he said, his voice rough. "Prettier than most that come through here." She continued working, not responding, but he could feel the tension in her body, coiled tight as a spring. "What's your name?" he asked, surprising himself with the question. Did it matter? She was quiet for so long he thought she wouldn't answer. Then, so softly, he almost missed it. "Sarah, Sarah, Little Crow." "Well, Sarah, Little Crow," Tom said, turning her to face him. "Time to earn those supplies." She looked up at him, and again he saw that strange mixture of fear and pity in her eyes. "I tried to warn you," she whispered. "I tried to tell you." Before he could respond, before he could demand what she meant, she spoke again. "My English name is Sarah, but my real name, the name my father gave me, is Morning Star, and my father—" She paused, then lifted her chin with a sudden dignity despite her circumstances. "My father is White Wolf, chief of the Cold River people, the man who controls the Northern Passage, the man even the army fears to cross." Tom's hand fell away from her shoulder as if burned. He stared at her, looking for the lie, but found only truth in those dark eyes. "You're lying," he said, but his voice lacked conviction. She shook her head slowly. "I left my people to find my own way. I thought I could live in your world. I was wrong, but now—" She looked at him with something almost like sympathy. "Now you've touched me, and by the laws of my people, that means you've claimed me. My father will come. He has probably already begun riding." Tom felt the blood drain from his face. White Wolf. Even at his remote trading post, he'd heard the name. The chief who had burned an entire settlement in retribution for crimes against his people. The warrior who had held the Northern Passage against all comers for 20 years. He doesn't know you're here," Tom stammered. "He knows everything that happens to his children." "Sarah," Morning Star said simply. "He knew the moment you put your hand on me. That's why I begged you not to touch me. Not for my sake. I've faced worse, but for yours." She turned back to the shelves, continuing her work as if they'd been discussing the weather. "You should prepare yourself. Tom Garrison, my father will come with 300 warriors. Not to wage war, that would come only if you truly hurt me. They'll come to witness your choice." "What choice?" Tom's voice was hoarse. She glanced back at him, and now there was definitely pity in her gaze. "By our law, you've made a claim on the daughter of a chief. Now you must prove worthy of that claim or face the consequences. My father will offer you the trials. If you survive, you must take me as your wife and live by our ways. If you refuse or fail—" She didn't need to finish. Tom understood well enough what happened to men who wronged the daughters of war chiefs. "I didn't know," he whispered. "No." Morningstar agreed, returning to her sorting. You saw only a desperate girl with no money and no protection. You thought the old ways were dying, that you could take what you wanted without consequence. But the old ways are not dead. Tom Garrison. They're as alive as the grass, as constant as the sun. And now you must face them. Tom stumbled from the storage room, leaving her to her work. He needed air, needed whiskey, needed to think. But even as he reached for the bottle with shaking hands, he could hear it in the distance. Or was it his imagination? The thunder of hooves on the prairie, coming closer with each passing hour. The storage room had grown quiet save for the soft sounds of items being arranged on shelves. Tom stood frozen in the doorway, his mind reeling from what the girl, Morningstar, had just revealed. The name White Wolf echoed in his thoughts like a death knell. "You're lying," he said again, but his voice cracked with uncertainty. "Trying to scare me with stories." Morningstar set down a tin of peaches and turned to face him fully. In the dim light filtering through the high window, she looked less like the frightened girl who had entered his store and more like something ancient, inevitable. "When I was 7 years old," she began, her voice steady now, "my older sister went to the mission school. She was beautiful. Everyone said so. 16 years old, with eyes like stars and a laugh that could make flowers bloom." She paused, her gaze distant. The minister's son and his friends cornered her one day after lessons. What they did. She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. "My father found her by the river, her dress torn, her spirit broken. She wouldn't speak, wouldn't eat, just stared at nothing with eyes that had seen too much." Morningstar's voice remained calm, but Tom could see her hands clench at her sides. "That night, my father painted his face black, the color of war without mercy. He took 300 warriors to the settlement." Tom's mouth had gone dry. He remembered hearing about that incident. A settlement burned to the ground 8 years ago. Every building reduced to ash. The Army report had called it an unprovoked attack, but there were whispers of another story, one the authorities didn't want to acknowledge. "They say the flames could be seen for miles," Morningstar continued. "My father found the minister's son and his friends. He gave them to the women of our tribe, the mothers, the sisters, the grandmothers. Their screams lasted 3 days. When it was over, my father hung what remained from the trees as a warning. That's savagery." Tom managed. "Is it?" Morningstar tilted her head. "My sister never spoke again. She walks among us like a ghost, tending the sick but never smiling, never laughing. Those men stole her spirit. My father simply collected the debt." She returned to her work, handling each item with careful precision. "The army came, of course, a full regiment. They found my father waiting at the river crossing with his warriors. The colonel was smart. He knew a bloodbath when he saw one coming. They talked instead. In the end, the army withdrew. The official report blamed the fire on lightning." Tom leaned against the doorframe, his legs suddenly unsteady. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because you need to understand," Morningstar said simply. "My father learned something that day. He learned that your people respect only strength, understand only consequences. So he made a new law for our tribe. Any man who touches an unmarried daughter of our people claims her as wife. If he's worthy, he may keep her. If not—" She shrugged. "The women still sing songs about the minister's son." I wasn't going to." Tom's protests died in his throat. They both knew what his intentions had been. "My father is not unreasonable." Morningstar continued, organizing boxes with mechanical efficiency. "He knows the world is changing. He's made treaties, kept peace when possible. But there are lines that cannot be crossed. His daughters are such a line." "How many daughters does he have?" Tom asked, though he wasn't sure why it mattered. 3. My sister, who no longer speaks, myself, and little Rain, who is only 12. She glanced at him. "Each of us knows our worth in Father's eyes. Each of us was taught what to say if a man laid hands on us without permission." Tom felt the weight of inevitability settling on his shoulders. What exactly did I do? By your laws, I mean, I only held your wrist. You held my wrist and pulled me against my will. You made your intent clear. By our standards. That's a claim. She finished with one shelf and moved to another. In the old days, you would simply be killed, but my father has adapted. Now, and you must prove yourself worthy of what you tried to take. And if I run? Tom asked, already knowing the answer. Morningstar actually smiled then, a sad, knowing expression. Where would you run? My father knows every trail, every waterhole, every hiding place for 500 miles. His warriors include some who served as army scouts, who know your ways as well as ours. And even if you could escape... She gestured around the trading post. This is your life, your kingdom. Would you abandon it all to live as a fugitive? Tom slumped against the wall. The girl was right. He'd spent 15 years building his business, establishing himself as the man who controlled this crossroads. He had money in the bank in Denver, contracts with suppliers, a reputation, such as it was. He couldn't just disappear. What are these trials? He asked finally. That depends on my father's mood, Morningstar said. Sometimes it's combat, you against our champion. Sometimes it's survival. 3 days in the sacred lands with no weapons, no food, only what the earth provides. Sometimes it's wisdom, answering riddles, proving you understand our ways. She paused in her sorting. You're not a warrior, so I doubt he'll demand combat. You're not wise in our traditions, so riddles would be pointless. Most likely, he'll test your spirit through survival. 3 days without food or water? The sacred lands have water if you know where to look. Food, too. If you're clever, it's not about staying comfortable. It's about proving you have the strength to endure hardship, the humility to learn from the land, the wisdom to survive without taking more than you need. Tom laughed bitterly. And if I survive this trial, I have to marry you. You have to offer to marry me, Morningstar corrected. I can refuse, but if I refuse after you've completed the trial, the matter is settled. You've shown respect for our ways, proven your worth, and the debt is paid. So you'd refuse? She looked at him with those dark, knowing eyes. Yesterday, I would have refused immediately. But yesterday, you were just another white man who saw me as something to use and discard. Today, she turned back to the shelves. Today, we'll see what kind of man you really are. Tom wanted to rage, to deny, to assert his rights as the owner of this establishment. But the truth was already settling into his bones. He had brought this on himself with his arrogance, his assumption that might made right, that a desperate girl with no money was fair game for his desires. Your father, he said slowly, White Wolf. The stories about him, are they all true? Which stories? Morningstar asked. The one where he held Eagle Pass against 2 companies of cavalry with only 50 warriors. True. The one where he tracked the man who killed his brother across 3 territories and through a blizzard. True. The one where he speaks with spirits and can smell a lie on the wind. She smiled slightly. That one might be exaggerated. He can't smell lies. He just knows people very well. And he's coming here. He's already on his way. I imagine he left within an hour of your touching me. 300 warriors. As I said, not for war. He won't need them all for you. But as witnesses. What happens here will be remembered. Will become part of our law. Our stories. The man who touched White Wolf's daughter and faced his judgment. Tom pushed himself away from the wall and walked unsteadily to a crate, sitting down heavily. The afternoon light was fading, casting long shadows through the storage room. Outside, the prairie would be turning gold, the sky beginning its nightly transformation. On any other day, he might have stood on his porch with a drink, surveying his domain, master of all he could see. I'm not a bad man, he said, surprising himself with the words. Morningstar continued her work without comment. I've never killed anyone. Tom went on. Never stolen. Not really. I've made my way honest enough. Built something from nothing. I get lonely out here. And when I saw you, looking so lost, so pretty, I thought... You thought I was weak. Morningstar finished. You thought I had no protection, no value beyond what you could take from me. That's what makes you like so many others. Not evil, perhaps, but blind to any strength but your own. Tom wanted to protest, but the words stuck in his throat. She was right. He'd seen her poverty, her solitude, her race, and made his calculations based on those factors alone. It had never occurred to him that she might be more than what appeared on the surface. Your father, he said, changing the subject. He'll really make me do this trial? He'll give you a choice. Morningstar said, face the trial or face immediate judgment. Most men choose the trial. It at least offers hope. And you'll just go back with him, after coming all this way to escape? She was quiet for a long moment, her hands stilling on the shelf. I didn't leave to escape my father or my people. I left to see if there was a place for me in your world, a place where I could be both Morningstar and Sarah, where the two halves of my spirit could exist together. She resumed her sorting, but her movements were slower, more thoughtful. I've learned there is no such place. Your world sees only what it wants to see. So yes, I'll go back. At least there I'm known for who I am, not what I appear to be. The light continued to fade, and Tom found himself straining to see her in the growing darkness. She moved like a shadow herself, placing the last items on the shelves with careful precision. There, she said finally. Your storage room is organized. I've earned my supplies. Take whatever you need. Tom said tiredly. It doesn't matter now. It all matters. Morningstar corrected. Every choice, every action, every word. That's what my father taught us. That's what your people never seem to understand. Everything matters. She walked past him toward the door, and he caught her scent, sage and prairie grass and something wild. At the threshold, she paused. He'll be here by tomorrow's sunset, she said without turning. You should prepare yourself. Tom Garrison. Whatever you think you know about facing death, the trial will be harder. Death is just an ending. The trial is a transformation. Then she was gone, moving into the main store to gather her supplies, leaving Tom alone in the darkness of the storage room with nothing but his thoughts and the growing certainty that his life at the crossroads had just become a crossroads itself, one from which there might be no return. The night descended on the trading post like a burial shroud. Tom sat behind his counter, a bottle of whiskey at his elbow. But for once the liquor brought no comfort. Every sound made him start. The creak of settling wood became approaching footsteps. The wind through the eaves became distant war cries. Morningstar had taken her supplies and settled herself in the main room, sitting cross-legged near the window. She'd refused his offer of the back room, choosing instead to keep watch on the horizon. In the lamplight, her face was serene, almost peaceful, as if she were waiting for a sunrise rather than an army. You could leave, Tom said for the third time, his words slightly slurred. Tell them I never touched you. Tell them it was a misunderstanding. She didn't look at him. You still don't understand. My father knows, not because anyone told him, but because this is how the world works. Actions have consequences. Stones thrown in water make ripples. You touched his daughter. The universe itself carries that truth to him. Tom took another drink. That's superstition. Is it? She finally turned to him. Your own Bible speaks of God seeing all, knowing all. Is it so hard to believe that a father might know when his child is threatened? Outside, coyotes howled in the distance, their cries carrying across the empty plains. Tom had heard them 1,000 times before, but tonight they sounded different. Mournful, prophetic. I could fort up, he said, gesturing around the solid walls. I've got ammunition, supplies. These walls have held off Comanche raiders. Raiders come for goods, for horses, for things that can be taken and traded. Morningstar replied. My father comes for justice. He would wait a week, a month, a season. His warriors would hunt the buffalo, live off the land, while you slowly starved inside your fortress, and eventually you would have to emerge. Tom's hands shook as he poured another drink. The liquor burned, but it couldn't wash away the growing fear that constricted his throat. I've worked hard for this place, 15 years of my life, and in one moment of selfish desire, you risked it all. Her voice held no sympathy, only fact. That's another thing my father taught us. A lifetime of building can be undone by a single foolish choice. The lamp flame flickered, casting dancing shadows on the walls. Tom found himself staring at those shadows, seeing in them shapes of mounted warriors, of judgment approaching on swift horses. Tell me more about him. Tom said, Your father. Maybe if I understand him. Morningstar considered this. He wasn't always a war chief. When he was young, he wanted to be a holy man, to speak with spirits and heal the sick. But then the soldiers came to our lands. His teacher, an old medicine man, was killed trying to protect the sacred bundle. My father took up the war lance that day. He's been carrying it ever since. So he hates all white men? No. She shook her head. He hates those who take without asking, who see our people as less than human. He's made friends among your people, traders who deal fairly, missionaries who truly wish to help, even some soldiers who honor their word, but those who prey on the weak, who use their power to hurt those who cannot fight back. She trailed off, but the implication was clear. Tom felt the weight of her words settle on him like stones. How many times had he cheated Indian traders, knowing they had no recourse? How many times had he looked at their women with calculating eyes, deterred only by the presence of their men? I wasn't always like this, he said, surprising himself with the admission. Back in Ohio, I had a wife, Mary, sweet little thing with corn silk hair and a smile like spring sunshine. The whiskey was loosening his tongue, bringing up memories he usually kept buried. Cholera took her in a 49, along with our baby boy. After that, nothing seemed to matter much. Came west to forget, ended up just becoming harder, meaner. Morningstar's expression softened slightly. Grief can twist a man's spirit, but it doesn't excuse what you've become. No, Tom agreed, staring into his glass. No, it doesn't. The night wore on. Tom dozed fitfully in his chair, starting awake at every sound. Morningstar remained at her vigil by the window, as still as a statue. Once, near midnight, Tom woke to see her lips moving in what might have been prayer, though he couldn't hear the words. Dawn came slowly, painting the eastern sky in shades of pink and gold. Tom's head pounded from the whiskey, his mouth dry as cotton. He stumbled to the water barrel, splashing his face, trying to wash away the night's fears. You should eat, Morningstar said. Whatever comes, you'll need strength. Tom tried, but the biscuits turned to sawdust in his mouth. The dried beef might as well have been leather. His stomach churned with anxiety and alcohol. The morning passed with agonizing slowness. A few travelers appeared on the horizon, but upon seeing Morningstar in the window, they changed course, giving the trading post a wide berth. Word was already spreading. Tom realized the prairie had its own way of carrying news. By noon, the heat had become oppressive. Tom had given up any pretense of normalcy, simply sitting and waiting. Morningstar had braided sweetgrass, filling the air with its distinctive scent. She seemed calm, centered, as if she'd found some inner peace that eluded him entirely. There, she said softly. Tom looked where she pointed and felt his heart stop. On the horizon, a dark line had appeared, wavering in the heat shimmer like a mirage. But this was no trick of the light. As he watched, the line grew more distinct, resolved into individual shapes, mounted warriors, moving with purposeful determination. Oh God, Tom breathed. Yes, Morningstar agreed. Now is a good time for prayer. The warriors approached as they had the day before, silent, disciplined, inevitable. Tom could make out details now. The feathers in their hair, the decorated shields, the lance points glinting in the afternoon sun. 300 men, as promised, spreading out to encircle the trading post in a living wall. At their head rode White Wolf, and, seeing him again in daylight, Tom understood why even the army feared him. This was a man who had survived everything the frontier could throw at him: disease, warfare, betrayal, loss, and emerged not broken but tempered like steel. The chief dismounted at the same spot as before, but this time he didn't approach immediately. Instead, he stood studying the trading post, his gaze lingering on the window where his daughter waited. Something passed between them. A look, a subtle gesture, and Morningstar rose and walked to the door. "It's time," she said simply. Tom's legs felt like water, but he forced himself to stand. The whiskey bottle called to him, promising courage. But he left it on the counter. Whatever was coming, he sensed he needed to face it with clear eyes. He opened the door and stepped onto the porch. The afternoon sun hit him like a physical blow, and he squinted against its brightness. White Wolf waited, patient as the mountains, surrounded by his warriors. Morningstar walked past Tom without a glance, moving to her father's side. They spoke quietly in their own language, her gestures animated, his responses measured. Tom caught his own name several times, and other words that needed no translation. Touched, claimed, choice. Finally, White Wolf stepped forward, up close. Tom could see the scars that marked him as a warrior, the lines that spoke of leadership and loss. When he spoke, his English was careful but clear. "Tom Garrison, you have laid hands on my daughter." Tom's throat was so dry he could barely speak. Yes, but I didn't." White Wolf held up a hand. "What you did not do matters less than what you did. You touched her against her will. You showed intent to do more. By the laws of my people, this is a claim of marriage." "Do you deny this?" Tom wanted to deny it, wanted to argue technicalities, but looking into those implacable eyes, he knew that lies would serve no purpose here. "I don't deny that I touched her." "Then you must prove worthy of that claim or face judgment. This is our way. And if I refuse?" White Wolf's expression didn't change, but something in the air shifted, became heavier. Several warriors adjusted their positions slightly, hands moving to weapons. "Then you declare yourself unworthy by choice rather than by trial. The result is the same, but the manner of reaching it." He let the sentence hang unfinished. Tom understood. Die trying or die refusing. Those were his options. At least the trial offered a chance, however slim. "What kind of trial?" he asked. White Wolf studied him with those penetrating eyes. "You are not a warrior, so combat would be meaningless. You know nothing of our ways, so tests of knowledge would be pointless." He paused, considering. "You will face the trial of earth and sky, 3 days and 3 nights in the sacred lands, without weapons, without supplies, with only what the earth provides and what wisdom you can find. If you survive, if you return having learned what the land teaches, then we will speak of marriage and choices. And if I don't survive, then the earth has rendered judgment, and my people need not." Tom felt sweat trickle down his back despite the cooling afternoon. 3 days in the wilderness with nothing. He was a townsman, a trader. What did he know of survival beyond 4 walls? "When?" he asked. "Now," White Wolf replied. "My warriors will take you to the sacred lands. You will enter as the sun sets. You will have until the sun sets 3 days hence to find your way to the circle of standing stones and touch the center stone. Succeed, and you may return. Fail." Again, the sentence went unfinished. Tom looked around at his trading post, his life's work. Then he looked at Morningstar, standing beside her father, her face unreadable. Finally, he looked back at White Wolf. "I need to prepare—" "No," the chief's voice was final. "You go as you are, with what you are. The trial has already begun." 2 warriors dismounted and approached Tom. They weren't rough, but their intent was clear. One gestured toward a spare horse they'd brought. Tom cast one last look at his trading post, at the life he'd built and might never see again. Then, with the legs that felt disconnected from his body, he walked to the horse and mounted. As the party began to move, he heard Morningstar call out something in her language. White Wolf responded, and though Tom didn't understand the words, he caught the tone, a father reassuring a daughter, or perhaps a daughter reassuring a father. Then they were riding, leaving the crossroads behind, heading toward whatever judgment the sacred lands would render. The sun was already descending toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of blood and gold. Tom Garrison, who had thought himself master of his small domain, rode toward a trial that would strip away everything but the truth of who he was underneath. Behind them, dust clouds marked their passage. Ahead, the sacred lands waited, patient and pitiless as time itself. The sacred lands lay 2 hours' ride from the trading post, a journey that passed in tense silence. Tom rode surrounded by warriors, their faces impassive as carved stone. White Wolf led the procession, his bearing regal despite the simple clothes he wore. Behind them, the rest of the war party followed in perfect formation, a river of horsemen flowing across the prairie. As they rode, the landscape began to change. The familiar grasslands gave way to rougher terrain, ancient buttes rising like broken teeth from the earth, deep ravines carved by forgotten rivers, stands of twisted juniper that seemed to whisper secrets in the wind. This was old land, untouched by plow or settlement, holding memories that predated any human presence. They stopped at the edge of a vast depression in the earth, perhaps 5 miles across, ringed by weathered sandstone cliffs. The bottom was a maze of arroyos, rock formations, and scattered vegetation. In the far distance, Tom could make out what might have been standing stones, though the heat shimmer made it impossible to be certain. White Wolf dismounted and motioned for Tom to do the same. The chief walked to the edge of the depression and gazed down into it with an expression that might have been reverence. "This is the bowl of testing," he said. "My people have used it for generations to prove worthiness, to seek visions, to find truth. The land here remembers everything, every trial, every triumph, every failure." Tom's mouth was dry. "Water? There is water, if you know how to find it. Food as well. The earth provides for those who approach with respect and wisdom." White Wolf turned to face him. "But it is unforgiving to fools and the arrogant. Many men have entered the bowl. Not all have emerged." The sun was touching the western horizon now, painting the rocks in shades of red and gold. White Wolf gestured to one of his warriors, who produced a knife and approached Tom. "Your boots," the chief said. "Your belt, your shirt. These you may keep. Everything else, coins, weapons, tools, stays here." Tom wanted to protest but saw the futility of it. He emptied his pockets, surrendering a folding knife, matches, some coins, a small flask he'd hidden in his boot. The warriors searched him thoroughly but without roughness, ensuring he carried nothing that might aid his survival. When they were satisfied, White Wolf spoke again. "The rules are simple. Enter the bowl as the sun sets. Find your way to the circle of standing stones at its heart. Touch the center stone before sunset 3 days hence. Do this, and you may return to face what comes next. Fail—" He shrugged eloquently. "What if I just hide for 3 days and claim I made it?" White Wolf almost smiled. "The center stone bears the handprints of all who have touched it in sacred paint. You will leave your mark, or we will know you have not reached it. Besides," he added, looking at Tom with those penetrating eyes, "lying about a spirit trial brings its own punishment. The land would know, and the land remembers." Tom stood at the edge of the bowl, looking down at the maze of rocks and shadows, without his boots. The ground felt rough beneath his feet, without his shirt. The evening air was already cool on his skin. He'd never felt so vulnerable, so stripped of everything that had defined him. "Any advice?" he asked, not really expecting an answer. White Wolf was quiet for a long moment. Then, "Listen. The land speaks to those who listen. And remember, you are not here to conquer or to take. You are here to learn." With that, he stepped back, joining his warriors. They formed a semicircle at the cliff's edge, silent witnesses to what was about to unfold. Tom took a deep breath and began his descent. The path was steep, treacherous with the loose rocks that shifted under his bare feet. Several times he nearly fell, catching himself on rough stone that scraped his palms. By the time he reached the bottom, full darkness was approaching. and his feet were already sore and bleeding slightly. He looked back up at the rim. The warriors were still there, silhouetted against the dying light, as motionless as the stones themselves. Then, as if by some unspoken signal, they began to sing, a low, rhythmic chant that seemed to emerge from the earth itself. The sound followed him as he stumbled forward into the maze. The first night was the worst. Without any idea where to go or what to look for, Tom wandered aimlessly, stubbing his toes on unseen rocks, brushing against cacti that left their spines in his skin. The temperature plummeted, and he found himself shivering uncontrollably, his teeth chattering so hard he feared they might crack. He tried to find shelter in a shallow cave, but discovered it was already occupied by something that rattled ominously when he approached. He backed away quickly, heart pounding, and continued his blind wandering. Thirst came quickly. His mouth felt like sand, his tongue swollen and clumsy. He'd taken water for granted all his life. Always a barrel in the store, always a stream within riding distance. Now, in the darkness, with no idea where to look, water seemed as mythical as gold at rainbow's end. When dawn finally came, Tom was huddled against a rock wall, his body one large ache. His feet were bloody, his skin scratched and torn from encounters with unseen thorns. He'd never been so miserable in his life, but with the light came a tiny spark of hope. He could see the bowl properly now, a vast labyrinth of red rock and scattered vegetation. And there, perhaps 2 miles distant, the standing stones rose from a flat area, their dark forms unmistakable. 2 miles. On a normal day, a trivial distance, but with torn feet and a body already weakened by thirst, it might as well have been 20. Tom forced himself to move, picking his way carefully through the rocks. The sun climbed higher, and with it came heat that struck like a hammer. His skin, pale from years inside the trading post, began to burn almost immediately. By noon, he was stumbling, dizzy, his vision blurring. It was then, in his delirium, that he noticed the birds, small desert birds, finches perhaps, flitting from bush to bush, and they were all heading in the same direction. Tom's fevered brain took a moment to process this. Then understanding struck. Birds need water. He followed them, moving painfully from shade to shade, and was rewarded when he found a small seep at the base of a rock wall. The water was barely a trickle, gathering in a depression no bigger than his cupped hands. But it was the sweetest thing he'd ever tasted. Tom spent hours at the seep, drinking slowly, letting his body absorb the precious liquid. He soaked his torn feet, feeling the cool relief, and for the first time since entering the bowl, he truly looked around instead of merely struggling forward. The land was harsh but not dead. He saw the tracks of small animals in the sand, the delicate flowers of cacti blooming despite the heat. A lizard watched him from a nearby rock, its throat pulsing, completely unafraid. Life persisted here, even thrived, by knowing the land's secrets. As evening approached, Tom made a decision. Instead of pushing toward the stones, he would prepare. He gathered dry grass and twigs, remembering something about making cordage. His fingers were clumsy, but eventually he managed to twist together something resembling rope. He used flat stones to dig out a deeper basin for the seep water. He even managed to weave a crude hat from yucca leaves, providing some protection from the sun. That night, he didn't wander. He stayed near the water, conserving energy. When the cold came, he buried himself partially in sand that still held the day's warmth. It wasn't comfortable, but it was survivable. The second day dawned with Tom feeling marginally human again. His feet were still painful, but the bleeding had stopped. His sunburn hurt, but the hat helped. Most importantly, he had water. He spent the morning observing, learning. He watched which plants the small animals ate, noticed how they moved always from shadow to shadow. He saw a snake catch a mouse and understood that even here, in this seemingly barren place, there was food for those who knew how to find it. By afternoon, he'd managed to knock down some cactus fruit using a long stick. carefully removing the spines before eating the sweet flesh. It wasn't much, but it was something. He also discovered that certain roots, when dug up, contained moisture and nutrients. As the second night fell, Tom made another choice. He would move toward the stones, but carefully, learning as he went rather than rushing blindly forward. The journey that followed was unlike anything in his previous life. He moved slowly, reading the land like a book written in stone and shadow. He learned that certain rock formations channeled the rare rains into hidden pools. He discovered that the best paths were often the ones worn by animals over generations. He found that silence and stillness brought rewards. A glimpse of bighorn sheep, the discovery of edible plants, the gift of understanding. On the morning of the third day, Tom stood at the edge of the circle of standing stones. He was transformed, skin darkened by sun, body lean from hunger, feet tough from walking on stone. But more than physical changes, something in his eyes had shifted. The arrogance was gone, replaced by something harder to define. Awareness, perhaps, or humility. The stones stood in a perfect circle, each twice the height of a man, covered in ancient symbols and handprints of those who had come before. At the center stood a single stone, smaller than the rest but polished smooth by countless hands over countless years. Tom approached slowly, almost reverently. This place felt different from the rest of the bowl, older, more significant. The air itself seemed to thrum with presence. He reached out and placed his palm on the center stone. It was cool despite the morning sun, and for a moment, Tom could have sworn he felt something. A pulse, a whisper, a connection to all those who had stood here before him. Near the base of the stone, he found a small pot of sacred paint, covered to protect it from the elements. With careful fingers, he coated his palm and pressed it against the stone, leaving his mark among the hundreds of others. Some were fresh, some faded by time, but all told the same story. Someone had been tested and had survived. Tom sat in the circle's center as the day wore on. No longer concerned about the time, he'd done what was asked, but more importantly, he'd learned what the trial was meant to teach. The land wasn't his enemy. It was a teacher, harsh but fair. Survival wasn't about conquering, but about understanding, adapting, becoming part of the whole rather than standing apart from it. As the sun began its descent toward the western horizon, Tom made his way back to the rim trail. The journey that had seemed impossible 3 days ago now felt merely challenging. He knew where to find water, where to rest, how to move with the land rather than against it. He emerged from the bowl as the sun touched the horizon. Exactly as promised, White Wolf and his warriors waited. Having maintained their vigil for 3 days and nights, they showed no surprise at his appearance. Sunburned, lean, changed, as if they had known all along he would return. White Wolf approached and studied Tom's face intently. Whatever he saw there seemed to satisfy him, for he nodded once. "You have touched the stone?" Tom held up his hand, still bearing traces of the sacred paint. "I have. And what did you learn?" Tom considered the question. How could he put into words the transformation of the past 3 days? How could he explain that the man who had entered the bowl, arrogant, certain of his superiority, no longer existed? "I learned," he said slowly, "that strength isn't about taking what you want, it's about understanding what you need. I learned that the land provides for those who approach with respect, but destroys those who come with greed. I learned." He paused, then met White Wolf's eyes directly. "I learned that I've been a fool." White Wolf's expression didn't change, but something in his stance relaxed slightly. "The beginning of wisdom," he said, "is recognizing ignorance. Come, we return to the trading post. There is still much to be decided." As they mounted for the ride back, Tom cast one last look at the bowl of testing. In 3 days, it had stripped away everything he thought he was and shown him what remained underneath. He wasn't sure he liked all of what he'd discovered, but at least now he knew the truth of himself. The trial of survival was over, but Tom sensed that in many ways. The real test was just beginning. The sacred lands were 3 days behind Tom Garrison, but they lived in every step he took, every breath he drew. His feet, toughened by stone and thorn, found purchase on the rough ground without thought. His eyes, sharpened by necessity, read the landscape with new understanding. The man who stumbled blindly into the bowl of testing was gone. What returned was something altogether different. The morning sun cast long shadows as Tom walked the final steps back to his trading post. The familiar building looked strange to him now, as if he were seeing it for the first time, or perhaps seeing it truly for the first time. The solid walls that had once represented security now seemed like a prison. The goods displayed in the windows, once his pride, appeared as mere clutter. Morningstar stood on the porch, her dark eyes tracking his approach. She had changed from the faded calico into traditional dress, soft doeskin decorated with beadwork that caught the light. Her hair was freshly braided with feathers and small shells that made soft music when she moved. She looked like what she was, the daughter of a chief, not the desperate girl he had tried to trap. "You survived," she said simply as he climbed the steps. Tom nodded, unsure of his voice. His throat was still raw from thirst. His body lean from hunger, but more than physical changes. He felt hollowed out and refilled with something he couldn't yet name. White Wolf emerged from the trading post, having apparently made himself comfortable during Tom's absence. The chief studied him with those penetrating eyes, taking in every detail of his transformation. "The land has marked you," he observed. "This is good. A man cannot learn if he remains unchanged." Tom found his voice at last. "I touched the stone. I survived your trial. What happens now?" "Now," White Wolf said, "we speak of marriage and choices." He gestured for Tom to enter his own building. Inside, Tom found several of White Wolf's warriors seated around his store, calm and watchful. They had touched nothing, taken nothing, but their presence transformed the space entirely. This was no longer Tom Garrison's kingdom. It was neutral ground. White Wolf took a seat at the table Tom usually used for poker games. Morningstar sat beside him, her posture straight, her expression unreadable. Tom sank into a chair across from them, acutely aware of his appearance, sunburned, clothes tattered, bearing the marks of his ordeal. "You have proven you can survive," White Wolf began. "But survival alone does not make a man worthy. A rat survives. A cockroach survives. The question is, have you learned why you were tested?" Tom considered his words carefully. The old Tom would have blustered, made excuses, tried to negotiate, but the bowl had burned such impulses out of him. "I was tested because I saw your daughter as something to take rather than someone to respect," he said. "Because I used my position, my power over someone I thought was helpless. Because I had become—" He paused, searching for the right word. "Small in spirit, even as I thought myself big." Morningstar's eyes flickered with something. Surprise, perhaps. White Wolf nodded slowly. "This is truth, but knowing truth and living truth are different things. You say you wish to marry my daughter? Tom stopped. Did he? 3 days ago, marriage had been the farthest thing from his mind. He'd wanted only to satisfy a moment's desire. Now, looking at Morningstar in her finery, seeing her strength and dignity, he felt something else entirely. Not love, he wasn't fool enough to claim that, but perhaps the possibility of love, if he proved worthy of it. "I wish to make right what I did wrong," he said finally. "If that means marriage, then yes. But I understand now that marriage means more than I knew. It means accepting your ways, your laws. It means changing who I am. It means more than that." Morningstar spoke for the first time since they'd entered. Her voice was steady, controlled. "It means leaving this place. A husband lives with his wife's people until the first child is born. It means learning our language, our customs. It means giving up your whiskey, your cards, your old life entirely. Can you do this? Tom Garrison, can you become someone new?" Tom felt the weight of her words. Give up the trading post? Live among the Cold River people? Learn their ways? Everything in his past cried out against it. But when he thought of returning to his old life, the loneliness, the whiskey, the petty cruelties, He found he had no appetite for it. "In the bowl," he said slowly, "I learned that what I thought was strength was actually weakness. What I thought was independence was actually isolation. I built walls around myself and called it success. But inside those walls, I was dying as surely as I would have died in the desert without water." He looked directly at Morning Star. "I don't know if I can become someone new, but I know I can't remain who I was. If you'll have me, if you'll teach me, I'll try." Morning Star turned to her father and spoke rapidly in their language. White Wolf responded, his tone measured. They went back and forth for several minutes while Tom waited, understanding nothing but sensing the importance of what was being discussed. Finally, Morning Star faced him again. "My father says the choice is mine. By our law, you have earned the right to ask. But I have the right to refuse, and if I refuse, this matter ends. You will be free to return to your life, and we will trouble you no more. And if you accept?" "If I accept, we are bound, not by your ceremonies or papers, but by word and witness. You would come with us when we leave. You would live as one of us for a full turning of the seasons. If, after that time, we both wish it, we would be married in the way of my people. If not," she shrugged, "you would be free to leave, having paid your debt through service." Tom understood. A year of probation, essentially. Time to prove his change was real, not just desert-born desperation. Time for both of them to decide if a marriage between them could be more than penance for his actions. "That seems fair," he said. "Fair?" Morning Star's eyes flashed. "Fair would be leaving you to your whiskey and loneliness. This is mercy. Tom Garrison, my father offers it because he sees something in you worth saving. I consider it because—" She paused, seeming to search for words. "Because in the storage room, when you could have continued, you stopped." "When I told you who I was, you were afraid, yes, but also ashamed. There might be a good man buried beneath your hardness, but might is not certainty." Tom felt the truth of her words like blows. "Then why consider it at all?" "Because my father taught me that people can change if they truly wish to. Because I have seen men transformed by understanding. Because—" She hesitated, then continued more softly. "Because I am tired of being caught between worlds. If I must take a husband, perhaps one who also knows what it means to be changed, to be neither what he was nor yet what he might become, would understand." White Wolf spoke again in their language, and Morning Star nodded. "My father reminds me that the choice must be made now, before witnesses. Do you, Tom Garrison, ask for me as wife, accepting all that means?" Tom stood slowly, his legs still weak from his ordeal. "I do ask. Not as the man who grabbed you in that storage room. He's dead in the desert. But as whoever I'm becoming, I ask with humility. Not demand. I ask with respect. Not entitlement. I ask." Morning Star studied him for a long moment. Tom could see her weighing everything. His words, his manner, the changes written on his face and body. The warriors around the room watched silently, witnesses to whatever was decided. "Then I accept," she said finally. "With conditions." "What conditions?" "No whiskey, not a drop, not ever. It brings out the worst in you, and I won't have a husband who hides in a bottle." "Agreed. You will learn our language, not just words, but meaning. You will speak it as well as you speak English before we wed. I'll try. You will not try. You will succeed, or there will be no wedding." Her voice was firm. "Also, you will teach what you know, reading, writing, numbers. My people need these skills to survive in the changing world. You will share your knowledge freely, holding nothing back." "Yes." "And if, after a full turning of seasons, I decide you are not the man you claim to be becoming, you will accept my refusal and leave without argument or bitterness." Tom nodded. "I understand." Morning Star looked to her father, who stood and placed a hand on her shoulder. He spoke in English, his words formal and weighted with ceremony. "It is witnessed. Tom Garrison has asked, Morning Star has accepted with conditions, For one turning of seasons, he will live among the cold river people. He will learn our ways, speak our words, share our lives. If both find favor after this time, they may wed. If not, the debt is paid and all returns to balance." The warriors around the room murmured agreement, the sound like wind through leaves. "Now," White Wolf continued, "you have one day to settle your affairs here. Tomorrow at dawn, we ride north to our summer grounds. Bring only what you can carry on one horse. The rest—" He gestured around the trading post. "This is your past. Leave it as such." Tom looked around at his accumulated possessions, his kingdom of goods. Once, the thought of abandoning it all would have been inconceivable. Now, it felt like shedding old skin. What about the building, the inventory? Is there no one who would buy it? Tom thought. Henderson, over at Fort Laramie. He's been wanting to expand his operations. He'd give fair value for the stock, maybe take over the building lease. Then send word. We will wait while you make arrangements. But remember, you take only what fits on one horse. Choose wisely. The meeting broke up, the warriors filing out to their camp. White Wolf paused at the door. "You did well in the bowl," he said quietly. "Many men survive. Few learn. Fewer still allow themselves to be changed. Perhaps there is hope for you yet." When they were gone, Tom stood alone with Morningstar in his trading post. The late afternoon light slanted through the windows, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. "Why did you really accept?" he asked. She was quiet for a moment, then moved to the window, looking out at the prairie. "In your world, I was nothing. A desperate Indian girl with no money, no protection, no value except what men might take from me. In my world, I am the daughter of a chief, but that brings its own chains. Duty, expectation, the weight of being a bridge between old and new." She turned to face him. "But you, Tom Garrison, belong fully to neither world now. The desert has marked you, changed you. You might understand what it means to live between, to be always translating yourself for others. That understanding might be worth exploring. And if I fail, if I can't change enough, then you fail." She shrugged. "But at least you will have tried. That's more than most do." She moved toward the door, then paused. "One day to settle your affairs. Choose carefully what you carry forward. The man who hoards everything often holds nothing of value." Then she was gone, leaving Tom alone with his possessions and his thoughts. He looked around the trading post, at the goods he'd accumulated, the whiskey bottles behind the counter, the careful records of profit and loss. Once, these things had defined him. Now they seemed like artifacts from another man's life. He pulled out paper and ink, began writing a letter to Henderson. As his pen moved across the page, detailing inventory and proposing terms, Tom felt something he hadn't experienced in years: anticipation for tomorrow, curiosity about what came next. The trial in the desert had ended. The trial of transformation was about to begin. The journey back from the sacred lands took place in the deep blue of approaching twilight. Tom rode among the warriors, no longer a prisoner but not yet one of them, something in between, undefined. His body ached from the ordeal, muscles protesting each movement of the horse. But there was something clean about the pain, honest in a way the foggy discomfort of his whiskey mornings had never been. As they crested the final rise before the trading post, Tom saw it again with transformed eyes. The building sat at the crossroads like a spider at the center of its web, waiting for travelers to become entangled in need and commerce. How many times had he stood on that porch, calculating the desperation in approaching faces, adjusting his prices accordingly? The thought brought no pride now, only a vague disgust. White Wolf raised his hand, bringing the column to a halt. The old chief turned his horse to face Tom, studying him in the dying light. "You returned different than you left," he observed. "This is good, but the true test begins now." Tom nodded, understanding. The desert had been pure in its challenges: survive or die, learn or perish. But here, surrounded by the familiar, the temptations of his old life would whisper constantly. They made camp a quarter-mile from the trading post, the warriors efficient in their movements, setting up a perimeter, starting fires, tending horses. Tom dismounted stiffly, unsure of his place, until one of the younger warriors, a man perhaps 25 years old with a serious face, gestured for him to help with the horses. As they worked side by side, the warrior spoke in accented but clear English. "I am Joseph Two Rivers. My grandfather says I am to teach you our words, our ways." "Your grandfather?" Joseph nodded toward White Wolf. "He sees something in you. I am not yet convinced, but I will teach as he commands." It was honest, at least. Tom appreciated that more than false friendliness. "What should I do now?" "Now, you rest, eat. Tomorrow will be difficult enough." A bowl of stew was pressed into Tom's hands. Rabbit, from the taste, with wild onions and herbs he couldn't identify. It was simple fare, but after 3 days of cactus fruit and roots, it tasted like a feast. He ate slowly, savoring each bite, aware of the warrior's eyes upon him. Morning Star moved through the camp like a shadow, speaking quietly with various men, checking on the horses, helping with the evening meal. She had changed again, back into the simple calico dress, but something in her bearing remained regal. When their eyes met across the fire, she nodded once, acknowledgement, nothing more, before continuing her rounds. As full darkness fell, Tom found himself sitting alone at the edge of the firelight, looking toward his trading post. Every window was dark, the building a black shape against the stars. Inside were barrels of whiskey, boxes of goods, 15 years of accumulated wealth. The urge to walk over, to take just one drink to steady his nerves, rose in him like a physical need. "It calls to you." Tom startled. White Wolf had approached silently, now standing beside him, also gazing at the trading post. "The whiskey?" Tom asked. "The past, the man you were. He is not dead, only sleeping. He will wake many times in the coming moons, crying out for what he has lost." The chief's voice held no judgment, only understanding. "This is why the trial continues. Any man can change when death breathes on his neck. The question is, can he remain changed when comfort calls?" "I don't know," Tom admitted. "Honest words, better than brave lies." White Wolf settled himself on the ground with the ease of a much younger man. "Tell me, Tom Garrison, what did you see in the sacred lands?" Tom considered the question. "At first, only death, rock and thorn and sun, all trying to kill me. But then," he struggled for words, "I saw life. Small things, lizards, birds, flowers blooming in hidden places. I saw that the land wasn't trying to kill me. It simply was, and I had to learn to be with it, not against it." "And what else?" "I saw myself," Tom said quietly. "The real self, not the man I pretended to be. Weak, frightened, ignorant, but also," he paused, "capable of learning, of changing, maybe." White Wolf nodded slowly. "The sacred lands strip away lies. A man cannot pretend to the stones, cannot bargain with the sun. There is only truth there, hard as the rock itself." He was quiet for a moment. "My daughter believes you can become worth teaching. I am less certain, but I have been wrong before. Time will show." "Why give me any chance at all?" Tom asked. "After what I did, what I intended." "Because killing you teaches nothing. Because my daughter asked it. Because—" White Wolf stood, his joints popping slightly. "Because I once was a young man who thought strength meant taking. Life taught me otherwise, but the lessons were hard. Perhaps you can learn with less pain." He walked away, leaving Tom alone with his thoughts. Around the camp, warriors settled for the night, some already snoring, others keeping watch. The fire burned low, coals glowing like eyes in the darkness. Tom dozed fitfully, his body exhausted but his mind racing. Dreams came in fragments. The storage room, Morning Star's frightened eyes, the endless maze of the sacred lands, water that turned to sand in his hands. He woke repeatedly, disoriented, the ground hard beneath him despite the blanket someone had provided. Near dawn, he gave up on sleep and sat up, watching the eastern sky lighten. The camp stirred around him, warriors rising with practiced quiet, tending to morning tasks. Joseph Two Rivers appeared with a water skin and hard biscuits. "Eat light," he advised. "We ride far today." As the sun cleared the horizon, Tom stood before his trading post for the last time as its owner. Henderson from Fort Laramie had sent a rider in the night. Accepting the terms Tom had proposed, the man would arrive within the week to take possession. Tom entered the building. Seeing it now as a stranger might, dust motes danced in the morning light. The whiskey bottles gleamed behind the counter, promising their familiar comfort. His account books lay open where he'd left them, columns of numbers representing years of small victories and smaller compromises. He moved through the space methodically, filling a single pack with necessities, a change of clothes, his razor, a blanket. After consideration, he added 3 books, the Bible his mother had given him, though he'd rarely opened it, a volume of Shakespeare, foxed with age, and a journal, mostly empty pages waiting for words he didn't yet have. The rest, the accumulated possessions of 15 years, he left where they lay. Let Henderson sort through it, sell what had value, discard the rest. Tom Garrison, the trader, was dead. Whatever he became next would need very little of what that man had treasured. He paused at the counter, hand hovering over the whiskey bottles. One drink, just one, to mark the ending, to say goodbye properly. The others are ready. Morning Star stood in the doorway, watching him. How long had she been there? I know what you were doing. Her voice held no accusation. The thirst will be with you for many moons, maybe always. But each time you choose not to drink, you become stronger. Each time you reach for the bottle and pull back, you kill the old man a little more. Tom's hand dropped to his side. It's harder than I thought it would be. Everything worth doing is hard. If change was easy, everyone would do it. She entered the store, moving to stand beside him. My mother drank the white man's whiskey. Not much at first, just to ease the pain after my youngest brother died of the spotted sickness. But soon she needed more. Always more. In the end, she walked into a blizzard with no coat, no shoes, chasing visions only she could see. I'm sorry. Don't be sorry. Learn. Every bottle you don't open honors her spirit, proves that chains can be broken. She turned to go, then paused. The man waiting outside, he is becoming... The man reaching for whiskey, he is already dead. Choose which you wish to be. Tom took one last look around, then shouldered his pack and walked out. He didn't look back, didn't pause as his feet crossed the threshold for the final time. Behind him, the door swung shut with a sound like the closing of a book. The warriors were mounted and ready. Morning Star already on her spotted pony. A horse had been prepared for Tom, nothing fancy, a steady brown gelding with intelligent eyes. He tied his pack behind the saddle and mounted, his movement still stiff but growing more confident. White Wolf raised his lance, and the party began to move. North, toward the summer grounds of the Cold River people, toward a life Tom couldn't yet imagine, challenges he couldn't foresee. As they rode, Joseph Two Rivers fell in beside him. First lesson, he said without preamble. In our language, we say, Mitakuya Oyasin. It means, all my relations. Everything is connected. Man, horse, earth, sky. You are not separate from the world. You are part of it. Mitakuya Oyasin, Tom repeated, the unfamiliar syllables clumsy on his tongue. Again, Mitakuya Oyasin. Better, by the time we reach the summer grounds, you will say it properly. And maybe, if you are lucky, you will begin to understand what it means. They rode on, the trading post disappearing behind them, swallowed by distance and dust. Tom found himself breathing easier with each mile, as if bands around his chest were loosening. The thirst for whiskey remained, a dull ache behind his breastbone, but it no longer consumed him. Ahead, Morning Star rode straight-backed and graceful, her braids swinging with the movement of her horse. Not his wife, not yet, perhaps never, but for the first time in years, Tom found himself curious about tomorrow, about the possibilities that waited beyond the next rise. The sun climbed higher, warming his face. Around him, the warriors sang a traveling song, their voices rising and falling like the land itself. Joseph translated fragments, words about journey, about leaving the old behind, about the promise of good grass and clear water ahead. Tom didn't sing, didn't know the words, wouldn't have trusted his voice anyway, but he listened, letting the rhythm enter him, become part of him. With each beat of the horse's hooves, each mile that stretched between him and his old life, he felt something within him shifting, realigning. The trial in the desert had broken him down to his essential self. Now came the harder work of building back up, of becoming someone worth the second chance he'd been given. It would take time, moons, seasons, perhaps years, but for the first time in longer than he could remember, Tom Garrison had something he'd thought lost forever: hope. The party crested a rise, and the vast prairie stretched before them, endless and full of promise. Somewhere out there, the cold river people waited. Somewhere out there, a different life beckoned. Tom touched his heels to his horse's flanks, keeping pace with the others, riding toward whatever awaited. Behind him, the crossroads grew small, then vanished entirely, leaving only the open land and the possibilities it contained. The summer grounds of the cold river people lay in a valley protected by low hills, where a clear stream wound through cottonwoods and willows. As the war party crested the final ridge, Tom saw the village spread before him, perhaps 60 lodges arranged in careful order, smoke rising from cooking fires, children playing in the spaces between, dogs barking at their approach. A cry went up from the camp guards, and people emerged from lodges to witness their return. Tom felt the weight of their gazes, curious, suspicious, judging. He was the outsider here, the white man who had dared touch their chief's daughter. Whatever story preceded him, he knew it would not paint him favorably. White Wolf led them into the village with measured dignity. Women called out greetings and questions in their language. Children ran alongside the horses, and the camp dogs circled and barked until sharp words sent them slinking away. The procession stopped at a large lodge painted with running horses and symbols Tom couldn't read. "My lodge," White Wolf announced, dismounting with fluid grace. "You will stay with my family until other arrangements can be made." Tom climbed down from his horse, his legs stiff from the long ride. He was acutely aware of his appearance, sunburned, trail dusty, wearing the tattered remains of his trader's clothes. Around him, the people of the village gathered, speaking in low voices, their expressions ranging from curiosity to open hostility. Morning Star appeared at his elbow. "Keep your eyes down," she murmured. "Don't meet anyone's gaze directly. Not yet. You must earn the right to look them in the eye." It went against every instinct Tom had developed in 15 years of trading, but he lowered his gaze, focusing on the packed earth beneath his feet. Submission, humility. These were his tools now. An elderly woman emerged from White Wolf's lodge, hair silver white, face deeply lined but eyes sharp as obsidian. She studied Tom for a long moment, then spoke rapidly to White Wolf in their language. The chief responded, his tone respectful but firm. The woman's expression didn't soften, but she nodded once and disappeared back inside. "My mother," White Wolf explained. "She is unhappy with this arrangement, but she will abide by my decision." The crowd began to disperse, people returning to their daily tasks but throwing glances over their shoulders. Tom was led to a small lodge set apart from the others, barely large enough for one person, patched and worn but serviceable. "This was my uncle's," Morning Star explained. "He died last winter. No one has used it since. It's yours for now." Tom ducked inside. The space was dim, scented with old smoke and herbs. A sleeping robe lay rolled against one wall. A fire pit occupied the center, and various implements hung from the lodge poles. It was the farthest thing from his comfortable rooms above the trading post, but it was shelter. "Rest today," Morning Star said from the entrance. "Tomorrow, your education begins. Joseph will come for you at dawn." She left him alone. Tom sat on the packed earth floor, his pack beside him, and tried to process the enormity of what he'd done. He'd given up everything, his business, his position, his entire world, for the chance to make right a moment's cruel impulse. The weight of it threatened to crush him. That night, sleep came fitfully. The sounds of the village were alien to him. Drums in the distance, dogs barking, voices calling in a language he didn't understand. Several times he woke thinking he was back in the sacred lands, dying of thirst. Once, he could have sworn he smelled whiskey and came fully awake, heart pounding before realizing it was only memory taunting him. True to Morningstar's word, Joseph Two Rivers appeared at dawn, pulling back the lodge flap without ceremony. "Come, we begin." What followed was the hardest day Tom had experienced since the sacred lands. Joseph started with language, not just words, but concepts, ways of thinking that had no direct translation. Tom's tongue stumbled over sounds it had never made. His mind struggled with ideas that seemed to slip away like water. "No," Joseph said for the 100th time. "Not the water flows. In our language, water is alive, choosing its path. You must think differently." By midday, Tom's head pounded. Joseph showed no mercy, drilling him relentlessly. When Tom complained of hunger, Joseph led him to where the women were preparing food, then stood back. "Ask for food," he commanded. In our language, Tom tried, mangling the words so badly that the women laughed, not cruelly, but with genuine amusement. One of them, taking pity, showed him the correct pronunciation, making him repeat it until he got it right. Only then did he receive a bowl of stew and flat bread. The afternoon brought different lessons. Joseph led him to where young boys were practicing with bows. "You will learn," he said simply, handing Tom a child's bow. It was humiliating. The boys, none older than 12, could put arrow after arrow into their targets while Tom couldn't even string the bow properly. They giggled when his arrows flew wild, when the bowstring snapped against his forearm, leaving a welt, when he dropped the bow entirely. But one boy, perhaps 10 years old, approached and showed him the proper grip. "Like this, uncle," he said in careful English, gentle but firm. "Like holding a bird. Uncle." The respect in it, unearned but freely given, nearly undid Tom. Days blurred together. Language lessons at dawn, practical skills through the morning, how to properly skin a rabbit, how to identify edible plants, how to read weather signs. Afternoons with the boys, learning weapons and horsemanship. Evenings helping with camp tasks, always the least skilled, always struggling. The thirst for whiskey remained his constant companion. Some days it was manageable, a dull ache. Others, it roared through him like wildfire. Once, he found himself walking toward the lodge of a trader who'd arrived with goods, knowing the man would have whiskey, before Morningstar appeared in his path. "Where are you going?" "Tom Garrison." He couldn't lie to those knowing eyes. I was... "Yes, you were. And now?" He stood trembling, sweat beading his forehead despite the cool evening. The need was a living thing, clawing at his insides. But beyond Morningstar, he could see the village, children playing, women cooking, men talking around fires. His life now, if he could hold on to it. "Now I go back to my lodge," he said through gritted teeth. She nodded. "Each victory makes the next one easier. Remember that." Gradually, almost imperceptibly, things began to shift. His tongue found the rhythms of the language more easily. His arrows flew straighter. The women stopped laughing when he asked for food and began teaching him their names for things. The children no longer found him amusing but included him in their games, calling him Uncle Tom Who Learns. White Wolf watched it all with those penetrating eyes, saying little. But one evening, perhaps 3 weeks after their arrival, he summoned Tom to his lodge. Inside, the space was warm and richly decorated. Buffalo robes covered the floor. Painted parfleches held the family's possessions, and weapons hung from the lodge poles. White Wolf's mother sat in the place of honor, her expression still stern. Morningstar was there too, working on beadwork by the fire's light. "Sit," White Wolf commanded. Tom folded himself down, trying to manage it gracefully. His knees protested. He was learning to sit cross-legged for hours, but his body still rebelled. "Joseph tells me you progress with the language," White Wolf said, slower than a child, but steady. "This is good." "I'm trying, grandfather," Tom said, using the respectful form Joseph had taught him. The old woman snorted. "He speaks like a baby with rocks in its mouth, but he speaks." White Wolf countered mildly. "Many white men live among us for years and never try." He studied Tom. "Tell me, in our language, why do you stay? The work is hard. The life is not what you knew. Why not run back to your whiskey and soft beds?" Tom struggled to find the words in their language, finally mixing it with English when he had to. Because in the sacred lands I saw who I truly was. Empty, alone, taking but never giving. Here," he gestured around the lodge, "here I might learn to be full, to be part of something instead of apart from it." Morningstar looked up from her beadwork, something flickering in her eyes. Her grandmother muttered something Tom didn't catch, but it might have been less disapproving than before. "You will join the buffalo hunt," White Wolf announced. "The scouts have found a herd 2 days north. Every hand is needed. You will ride with the young men, help with the preparation, learn what it means to provide for the people." Tom's heart leaped. The buffalo hunt? He'd heard the men talking about it, seen them preparing weapons and horses. To be included. "I won't disappoint you, grandfather." "See that you don't. A man who cannot provide for the people cannot think of taking a wife." His eyes moved briefly to Morningstar, then back to Tom. "Go now. Prepare. We leave at dawn." Outside the lodge, Tom felt lighter than he had in weeks. The evening sky stretched endlessly above, stars beginning to emerge. The village moved around him with its familiar rhythms, children being called to bed, dogs settling for the night, the eternal smoke of cook fires. He found himself at Morningstar's favorite spot by the stream, though he hadn't consciously meant to go there. She appeared moments later, as he'd somehow known she would. "The buffalo hunt," she said without preamble. "It's dangerous. Men die every season, trampled or gored. My father tests you again. Everything here is a test." Tom replied, "Yes, but some tests you fail and live to try again. Others—" She skipped a stone across the water. "Why do you try so hard? Tom Garrison, you could do the minimum. Wait out your year, leave when the seasons turn." Tom considered the question. Why did he try? At first, it had been survival, then obligation. But now, because for the first time in my life, I want to be worthy of something, he said finally. "Worthy of the chance your father gave me. Worthy of your trust. Worthy of—" He paused, then plunged ahead. "Worthy of maybe, someday, earning your regard. Not as the man who grabbed you in that storage room, but as whoever I'm becoming." Morningstar was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was soft. "The man in the storage room is fading. I see him less each day. Who takes his place? That remains to be seen, but I am watching. Tom Garrison, I am watching with interest." She left him by the stream, her footsteps silent on the grass. Tom remained, looking up at the vast sweep of stars, thinking about buffalo hunts and language lessons and the long road still ahead. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote called, and its pack answered. The sound no longer seemed mournful to him, but spoke of belonging, of being part of something larger than oneself. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. The thirst would return, as it always did. He would stumble over words, fail at tasks children could do, struggle to find his place. But tonight, under the endless sky, with the stream murmuring its ancient song, Tom Garrison felt something he hadn't experienced in years. Peace. The transformation was far from complete. He was still more traitor than warrior, more white than cold river, more broken than whole. But he was changing, slowly, painfully, genuinely. And in Morningstar's careful interest, in White Wolf's gruff acceptance, in the children calling him uncle, he saw the faint outline of who he might yet become. The stars wheeled overhead, marking time's passage. Soon he would return to his small lodge, prepare for the hunt. Try to sleep despite the excitement and fear churning in his belly. But for now, he sat by the water and let himself hope that redemption, like the stream itself, might find its way around any obstacle if given time enough to work. In the village, drums began a slow rhythm, practice for the hunt dances to come. Tom listened, finding his heartbeat matching the ancient tempo. He was learning, step by painful step, what it meant to be part of something greater than himself. And in that learning, the man he had been continued his slow dissolution, making room for whoever he was meant to become.